Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from today. Please drop a comment below. My story, well, it's one I never thought I'd have to tell, especially not about my own flesh and blood. My son's wife, Chloe, once told me, right when I was at my lowest, that I was becoming a burden. A burden. After everything. I was sick, truly sick, and her words were like salt in a wound that was already festering. But she, and my dear son Mark, who stood by and let her say it, didn't know about the little secret I'd kept tucked away for years, a promise I'd made to myself. This is how that secret not only saved me but also showed them just how wrong they were to underestimate a mother's foresight. The first whispers of illness came like an unwelcome autumn chill in late summer. A persistent fatigue, at first easily dismissed as just getting older. I was 72 after all, and had always been active, priding myself on my independence. I'd raised Mark on my own after his father passed too young, working 2 jobs for years to ensure he never wanted for anything, to give him the education I'd only dreamed of. He'd met Chloe in his final year of university, a polished girl from a family with a bit more silver in their spoons than we'd ever had. I'd welcomed her, of course. She was Mark's choice. My small house, the one I'd bought with the insurance money and years of scrimping, was always open to them. Sunday dinners became a ritual, even after they married and bought their own place, a rather smart new build across town. Chloe was always pleasant, in a way that never quite reached her eyes. She'd compliment my cooking, my garden, but there was an underlying air of polite assessment, as if she were cataloging my life for some future, detached reference. The sacrifices I'd made for Mark were legion, from foregoing my own comforts to ensure he had the best school trips, to quietly paying off a rather substantial student loan he'd accumulated for a postgraduate degree he later abandoned. These weren't things I ever threw in his face. They were simply what a mother did. I believed that with my whole heart. But as the fatigue deepened, morphing into a bone-deep ache and a dizzying weakness that made even tending my beloved roses a monumental task, I started to see the faint cracks in the facade of our family dynamic. Mark, bless him, was worried, but he was also busy, caught up in his demanding career and, increasingly, in Chloe's meticulously curated social life. Chloe's initial concern seemed genuine enough, though laced with an efficiency that felt more clinical than caring. "You really should see Dr. Evans, Eleanor," she'd say, her voice smooth, already tapping his number into her phone. "We can't have you unwell." It was the "we" that subtly rankled, as if my health was an inconvenience to their schedule. The day I collapsed while trying to bring in the groceries was the day things began to shift from inconvenient to, in Chloe's eyes at least, problematic. Mark rushed over, his face a mask of anxiety, and insisted I see a specialist. Chloe trailed behind him, her expression one of carefully constructed concern, but her eyes darted around my small, slightly cluttered living room as if already calculating the disruption. The diagnosis, when it came after a battery of tests, was a form of aggressive autoimmune disease. Treatable, the doctors said, but the treatment would be arduous, involving long periods of immunosuppression, medication with severe side effects, and a significant chance of debilitating flare-ups. My independent life, the one I cherished, was suddenly under serious threat. The specialist spoke of needing regular assistance, especially during the initial treatment phases. Mark immediately said, "She'll come stay with us." Of course, I saw a flicker, just a momentary tightening around Chloe's mouth, before she pasted on a supportive smile. "Absolutely, Eleanor. We'll make it work. Whatever you need." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. The thought of being dependent was galling, but the thought of being a burden was even worse. And it was that word, burden, that began to echo in the silences, in the overly bright tones, in the way Chloe would sigh when she thought I wasn't listening. The early days of my illness were a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and a crushing weakness that made me feel like a stranger in my own body. I tried to be small, to be unobtrusive, to minimize my needs, but the very nature of the illness made that impossible. It was in those quiet, vulnerable moments, when the carefully constructed pleasantries wore thin, that I began to understand the true cost of my dependency, a cost Chloe seemed all too willing to tally. My old life, my independence, seemed to be slipping away, and with it, the comfortable illusion I'd held about my son and his wife. The illness was stripping away more than just my physical strength. It was laying bare the uncomfortable truths I had, perhaps, chosen not to see for a very long time. My move into Mark and Chloe's spare room was meant to be temporary, a safe haven while I navigated the treacherous early waters of my treatment. The room itself was pleasant enough, decorated in Chloe's signature minimalist style, all muted grays and impersonal art, but it felt cold, alien. It wasn't home. My own little house, with its worn armchair and shelves overflowing with books and photographs, felt a million miles away. Mark was initially attentive, bringing me tea, fluffing my pillows, his face etched with genuine concern. But Chloe's presence was a constant, low hum of barely veiled impatience. Her offers of help were always delivered with a slight edge, a reminder of the imposition. "Do you need another blanket, Eleanor? The heating is on quite high," or "I'll get your prescription, but I'll be late for my yoga class." Small things, perhaps, but they accumulated, each one a tiny pinprick to my already fragile spirit. The worst part was seeing the effect it had on Mark. He seemed caught in the middle, his loyalty to me warring with his desire to keep Chloe happy. I'd see him wince sometimes when Chloe made a particularly pointed remark, but he rarely challenged her, offering instead a weak placation or quickly changing the subject. His passivity was a fresh pain, a quiet betrayal that stung almost as much as Chloe's thinly disguised resentment. The true inciting incident, the moment the vague unease crystallized into a sickening certainty, came about 3 weeks into my stay. I was having a particularly bad day, the medication leaving me nauseous and weak. I drifted off to sleep in the afternoon and woke up needing assistance to get to the bathroom. I called out weakly for Mark, but there was no answer. I could hear voices from the kitchen, low and indistinct at first. Summoning all my strength, I managed to get to my feet, clinging to the furniture, and made my way slowly towards the door, intending to call out again. As I reached the hallway, their voices became clearer. Chloe was speaking, her tone sharp, stripped of its usual polite veneer. "I just don't know how much longer I can do this, Mark. It's constant. She needs something all the time. It's like having a baby again, but without any of the rewarding bits. Honestly, it's becoming a real burden." A beat of silence, then Mark's hesitant voice. "She's my mother, Chloe." "She's sick. I know she's your mother," Chloe snapped back, "and I know she's sick. But my life is on hold. Our life is on hold. The medical bills are starting to pile up too, even with her basic insurance. Have you even thought about the long-term cost? This isn't sustainable. We need to look at other options. Perhaps a facility." My blood ran cold. A facility. She made it sound like a storage unit. Burden. The words slammed into me with physical force. I leaned against the wall, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp, tears blurring my vision. All those years of sacrifice, of putting Mark first, of loving him unconditionally, and this was what it had come to. I was a burden, a problem to be managed, an expense to be minimized. The casual cruelty of her words, the calculated assessment of my worth, was devastating. And Mark hadn't defended me, not really. He'd offered a token resistance, but there was no force in it, no outrage on my behalf. In that moment, something inside me fractured. The naive belief in unwavering familial love, the assumption of unconditional care, it all crumbled, leaving behind a desolate landscape of disillusionment. I retreated back to my room, unnoticed, the echo of burden reverberating in my soul. That night, sleep was impossible. The physical pain of my illness was eclipsed by a far deeper emotional agony. The initial shock of Chloe's words left me reeling for days. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, a chilling isolation despite being under the same roof as my son. Every interaction with Chloe became layered with the memory of her callous dismissal. Her smiles seemed more artificial, her offers of help more transactional. I found myself scrutinizing Mark, searching for any sign that he shared her sentiments, or worse, that he was merely masking them better. His guilt was palpable. He'd avoid my gaze, his conversations stilted and overly solicitous, as if trying to compensate for something he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge. My heart ached for the easy relationship we once had, or at least, the one I thought we had. I replayed my life in my mind, every sacrifice, every act of love I'd poured into raising Mark. Had it all been for nothing? Was this my reward? To be considered an inconvenience, a financial drain, as I faced one of the biggest battles of my life? The injustice of it all churned within me, a bitter brew of sorrow and nascent anger. For weeks, I drifted in this sea of hurt. My illness continued its relentless course, some days better, some days plunging me into depths of weakness where even breathing felt like an effort. During those dark times, Chloe's words would return, whispering their poison. A burden, but then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something else began to stir within me. It wasn't just anger, though that was certainly a component. It was a flicker of defiance, a stubborn refusal to be defined by their perception of me. I had been a fighter all my life, overcoming widowhood, financial struggles, and the myriad challenges of single parenthood. Was I really going to let this illness and their callousness be the final chapter? The turning point came one bleak afternoon. I was staring out of the spare room window, watching the rain lash against the glass, feeling particularly low. Chloe had made a comment earlier about the cost of my latest medication, a sigh escaping her lips as she'd glanced at the pharmacy bill. Mark had just nodded, his brow furrowed with worry. And it hit me, not as an angry outburst, but as a cold, clear realization. I could not, and would not, rely on their begrudging charity. My dignity, my self-respect, demanded another way. And then, like a lifeline thrown in a stormy sea, I remembered. Years ago, after watching my own mother struggle in her final years, her savings dwindling under the relentless onslaught of medical expenses and the need for specialized care, I had made a promise to myself. I had sworn I would never put Mark in that position, nor would I ever want to be so vulnerable myself. With a clarity that belied my physical weakness, I recalled visiting a financial advisor, a kind, patient woman named Mrs. Peterson. She had listened to my fears and my modest financial situation and had recommended a comprehensive long-term care and critical illness policy. It wasn't cheap. The premiums had been a stretch on my small pension for years. I'd had to cut back on other things, little luxuries, even some necessities, to keep it going. I never told Mark about it. Not because I didn't trust him, not then, but because it was my safety net, my provision for future I hoped would never come. I didn't want him to factor it into his financial planning or, heaven forbid, see it as an eventual windfall. It was for me, for my independence, for my peace of mind. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't just a burden. I had a plan, a secret weapon they knew nothing about. A fierce resolve began to harden within me. I would not just survive this illness. I would do it on my own terms. And Chloe, with her calculated size and talk of facilities, would soon learn that Eleanor Vance was far from finished. The first step was to find the policy documents. I vaguely remembered stashing them in an old shoebox with other important papers in the bottom of my wardrobe back at my house. A surge of determination, stronger than any I'd felt in months, propelled me. I had to get to that box. The fight for my dignity had begun. The challenge, of course, was retrieving those documents without arousing suspicion. My own house, though only a 15-minute drive away, felt as inaccessible as the moon. I couldn't exactly ask Mark or Chloe to take me there on a whim, not without a plausible reason. Chloe, in particular, monitored my activities with an unnerving diligence, always questioning any deviation from my routine of rest and medication. "Where are you thinking of going, Eleanor? You know Dr. Peterson said you need to conserve your energy." Her concern was always framed by the doctor's orders, making it difficult to argue without appearing uncooperative or foolish. My mind, however, was newly sharpened by purpose. I began to observe their routines, their comings and goings. Mark worked long hours. Chloe had her yoga, her book club, her lunches with friends, a schedule that, while seemingly busy, also had predictable gaps. I needed one of those gaps. My ally in this, though she didn't know the full extent of my mission, was my old friend and neighbor, Martha. Martha was a retired nurse, pragmatic and kind, and she'd been calling regularly to check on me, her voice always a welcome balm of genuine warmth. During one of our calls, I carefully planted the seed. "Martha," I said, injecting a note of wistful longing into my voice, "I was just thinking about my little rose garden. I do worry about it. And there are a few sentimental things I'd love to have here with me, just to make this room feel a bit more like home." I knew Martha had a key to my house for emergencies. "Oh, Eleanor, of course," she said immediately. "Tell me what you need. I can pop over and pick them up for you." This was better than I'd hoped. I wouldn't even have to leave. But then I considered the specific location of the shoebox, tucked away, not immediately obvious. I couldn't ask Martha to rummage through my personal belongings. "Actually, Martha," I amended, "if you wouldn't mind, perhaps you could drive me over one afternoon? Just for half an hour. I know exactly where everything is. I'd like to see my place." Even for a moment, I feigned a little cough, adding, "If I'm feeling up to it, of course." Martha, bless her heart, agreed without hesitation. "Whenever you feel strong enough, dear. Just say the word." The opportunity came the following Tuesday. Chloe announced she had an all-day charity committee meeting. Mark would be at work. It was perfect. I called Martha, my voice betraying none of the nervous excitement thrumming beneath the surface. "Today might be a good day, Martha, if you're free." An hour later, Martha's familiar car pulled up. Getting out of Mark and Chloe's house felt like a small act of rebellion. The fresh air, even on a cool autumn day, was invigorating. As Martha drove, I kept the conversation light, talking about her grandchildren, the changing seasons. But inside, my mind was racing. What if the policy had lapsed? What if the terms weren't as comprehensive as I remembered? The short drive felt interminable. Walking into my own house was like stepping back into my own skin. The familiar scent of beeswax polish and old books, the sight of my worn armchair, my photos, my clutter, it was all wonderfully, reassuringly mine. I felt a pang of longing so sharp it almost brought tears to my eyes. But there was no time for sentimentality. "The things I need are just in my bedroom, Martha," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I won't be long in my bedroom." I went straight to the wardrobe. Kneeling was an effort, my joints protesting, but adrenaline fueled me. There, at the bottom, beneath a pile of old blankets, was the familiar floral shoebox. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. And there it was, a thick sheaf of papers, the logo of Provident Life and Annuity emblazoned on the top. I pulled out the main policy document, my eyes scanning the summary page. Comprehensive critical illness and long-term care plan, the coverage details, the payout conditions, it was all there, even better than I remembered. A wave of dizziness, this time from pure relief, washed over me. I quickly tucked the entire folder into the large handbag Martha had insisted I bring for my sentimental items. I grabbed a few photograph albums and a small, framed picture of my late husband, items that would lend credence to my stated purpose for the visit. Back in the living room, Martha was patiently waiting. "Find everything, dear?" "Yes, thank you, Martha." This means so much. On the drive back, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. The documents in my bag were more than just paper, they were my declaration of independence. That evening, after Chloe had returned, full of talk about the committee meeting and Mark was home, I waited until they were settled in front of the television. Then, pleading fatigue, I retired to my room. The door closed, I pulled out the policy. I read every word, every clause, my old reading glasses perched on my nose. The benefits were substantial, a significant lump sum upon diagnosis of a critical illness, which my autoimmune condition clearly qualified for, and then a generous monthly payout for long-term care, adaptable for either in-home nursing or a high-quality assisted living facility. It even included provisions for things like home modifications and therapeutic services. It was ironclad. I had paid into this for over 20 years, a silent investment in my future autonomy. Now it was time for that investment to mature. The next morning I made the call. My voice was surprisingly steady as I spoke to a representative at Provident Life, a polite and efficient young man named David. I explained my situation, gave him my policy number. He asked a few verifying questions, then said, "Yes, Mrs. Vance, I have your policy details here. It's fully active and in good standing. You'd like to initiate a claim?" A small, triumphant smile touched my lips. "Yes, David," I said. Yes, I would. The meticulous planning had begun. Chloe and Mark had no idea what was coming. The days following that first call to Provident Life were filled with a quiet, determined energy. David, the representative, was incredibly helpful. He explained the claim process clearly, forms to fill out, medical reports to gather from Dr. Peterson and the specialists, and a potential assessment. He assured me that given the severity of my diagnosis, the critical illness portion should be processed relatively quickly. The long-term care benefits would follow, tailored to my specific needs once assessed. I became a model of patient cooperation, but inwardly, I was a whirlwind of secret activity. During the day, when Chloe was out or preoccupied and Mark was at work, I'd make calls, fill out paperwork, and organize my medical documents. My spare room, once a symbol of my dependence, transformed into my command center. I used my old laptop, which I'd thankfully brought with me, to email, scan documents, and research care options. The irony was not lost on me. Chloe thought I was in decline, slowly fading, while in reality, I was more focused and proactive than I had been in years. I enlisted Martha's help again, this time more directly, though still without revealing the full picture. "Martha," I'd said, "I'm looking into some alternative care options. Things my current small insurance doesn't quite cover. Could you perhaps help me find some brochures for high-quality home care agencies and maybe some of those newer assisted living places? Not the dreary old folks' homes, but the ones that are more like apartments with support." Martha, ever practical, immediately understood. "Good for you, Eleanor. It's always wise to know your options." She returned a few days later with a stack of glossy brochures and a list of agency contacts. "Monica, my niece, works as an administrator at the Willows," she mentioned, pointing to a particularly luxurious-looking brochure. "She says it's lovely there, more like a resort." I tucked that information away. "Monica, that could be useful." As I delved deeper into the possibilities my Provident policy afforded me, a sense of empowerment grew. I could afford a private nurse. I could have physical therapy at home. If I chose to move, I could select a place like the Willows, with its gardens and activities, a world away from the grim facility Chloe had so casually suggested. The contrast between what they envisioned for me and what I could now achieve for myself was stark. Meanwhile, Chloe's complaints didn't cease. In fact, they seemed to escalate in proportion to my perceived helplessness. One evening, she and Mark were discussing finances in the kitchen, their voices carrying easily to the living room where I was pretending to read. "The prescription copays alone are adding up," Chloe sighed, loud enough for me to hear. "And Mark, we really need to talk about your mother's savings. Does she even have enough to cover, if things get worse for an extended period?" Mark mumbled something about my small pension and a modest savings account I'd mentioned. "Well, that won't last long, will it?" Chloe pressed. "We need to be realistic. There's that nursing home near the industrial park, Golden Years Rest Stop. It's affordable. Golden Years Rest Stop." The name itself sounded like a place where hope went to die. I pictured drab corridors and a lingering scent of disinfectant and despair. The sheer audacity, the cold calculation of it, sent a shiver down my spine, but it also solidified my resolve. They were so busy planning my decline, divvying up my imagined meager resources, that they had no idea I was orchestrating my resurgence. I made sure to keep up appearances. I'd sigh, with believable weariness, when Chloe mentioned an expense. I'd look suitably grateful for her help, even as her touch felt increasingly like a transaction. My acting skills, honed by years of motherhood and quiet endurance, were serving me well. The crucial piece of my plan was timing the reveal. I didn't want to just slip away quietly into a better situation. No, after what I'd overheard, after the constant erosion of my dignity, I felt they needed to understand the magnitude of their misjudgment. They needed to see that I was not the powerless, burdensome old woman they had decided I was. I was waiting for the critical illness lump sum to be confirmed and deposited. David from Provident Life called one Thursday morning, while Chloe was at her Pilates class and Mark was at a conference. "Mrs. Vance, I have excellent news. Your critical illness claim has been approved. The funds will be transferred to your account within 48 hours. I thanked him, my voice calm, but my heart was doing a celebratory jig. The first major step was complete. Now for the next phase, arranging the demonstration of my newfound independence. The last straw, as they say, wasn't one dramatic event, but rather a confluence of smaller, yet deeply telling, incidents that occurred in the week following the confirmation of my insurance payout. The money was now sitting securely in my bank account, a silent testament to my foresight, yet I held back, waiting for the opportune moment. Chloe, oblivious, seemed to ramp up her campaign to manage my future, presumably for my own good, of course. She started leaving brochures for Golden Years Rest Stop conspicuously on the coffee table. She'd sigh dramatically whenever she had to help me with something minor, like fetching a glass of water or adjusting my pillows, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "This is getting to be a full-time job." Mark, to his discredit, remained largely passive, his face a constant mask of harried stress. He was clearly worn down by Chloe's relentless negativity and the strain of my illness, but his inability to offer any meaningful support or to challenge Chloe's increasingly overt pronouncements about my future felt like a slow, agonizing betrayal. One afternoon, Chloe came into my room with a bright, false smile. "Eleanor," she began, perching on the edge of my chair as if conferring a great favor. "Mark and I have been doing some research, and we've found a place that seems quite suitable. Golden Years. It's very practical. And they have an opening next month. We thought we could go take a look together, perhaps next week." The casual way she delivered this, as if my entire life was now subject to their unilateral decisions, was breathtaking. She hadn't asked my opinion, hadn't discussed my preferences. She was simply informing me of the plan, a plan that involved consigning me to a place I instinctively knew would be soul-crushing. "Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I appreciate you looking into options, but I'm not sure I'm ready to consider a nursing home just yet." Her smile tightened. "Oh, Eleanor, we have to be realistic. This situation, it's not sustainable for us. Mark is exhausted, and frankly, so am I. Golden Years offers round-the-clock care, which, let's be honest, you increasingly need." The condescension in her tone was infuriating. It was the final, definitive confirmation that in her eyes, I was no longer a person with agency, but a problem to be solved, a burden to be offloaded. That evening, Mark approached me, looking sheepish. "Mum," he started. "About what Chloe said, Golden Years, it's actually not as bad as it sounds. We just want to make sure you're safe and looked after. And out of the way, Mark?" I asked, my voice devoid of accusation, just a weary sadness. He had the grace to flush. "No, not out of the way. Just it's hard, Mum." For everyone, his words, meant perhaps to be a plea for understanding, landed like another small betrayal. He was prioritizing their convenience, their comfort, over my dignity and well-being. That was it. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. I knew then that my reveal couldn't be just a quiet announcement. It needed to be a clear, unequivocal statement of my independence and their profound miscalculation. I spent the next 2 days making final arrangements. I contacted Monica, Martha's niece at the Willows, the upscale assisted living facility. I explained my situation, mentioned my long-term care policy, and inquired about immediate availability. Monica was sympathetic and incredibly efficient. "Actually, Mrs. Vance," she said, "we've just had a lovely one-bedroom apartment with a garden view become available. It's highly sought after. Given your insurance coverage, it would be perfectly suitable. We arranged for me to view it, discreetly, of course, the following Monday." I also contacted a reputable home care agency, one that specialized in providing support for individuals with autoimmune conditions. I scheduled a consultation with a care manager for Tuesday morning at Mark and Chloe's house. I wanted them to be there. I wanted them to witness firsthand the caliber of care I could now command. The stage was being set. My illness had made me physically weak, but it had also forged in me a will of iron. They thought they were planning my gentle decline into an affordable future. They had no idea I was about to rewrite the entire script. The feeling wasn't one of gleeful revenge, but of a deep, resonant need for justice, for the restoration of my self-worth. They had made their assumptions, drawn their conclusions, and treated me accordingly. Soon, they would learn how very wrong they had been. The chosen day for the initial phase of the reveal was that Tuesday morning. I'd told Mark and Chloe that a nice lady from a support agency was coming to talk about potential help options, phrasing it vaguely enough to sound like something they'd approve of, perhaps a charity worker or a social services representative who might find me some low-cost assistance. Chloe, I noted with a grim internal satisfaction, seemed particularly pleased. "Oh, good," she'd said, her voice a little too bright. "It's about time we got some professional advice on how to manage, well, everything." She probably envisioned someone who would validate her view that a nursing home was the only sensible path. Mark just looked relieved that someone else might be taking charge of the difficult conversations. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I was already dressed, sitting in the living room. A calm I hadn't anticipated settled over me. Chloe bustled to the door, smoothing her already immaculate blouse. "That'll be her," she announced, a note of proprietorial efficiency in her voice. She opened the door to reveal Mrs. Albright, the care manager from Elite Home Care Solutions, the agency I had meticulously researched. Mrs. Albright was the epitome of professional poise, impeccably dressed, carrying a smart leather briefcase, with an air of quiet competence that immediately commanded respect. Chloe's welcoming smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Albright didn't quite fit the image of a harried social worker from an underfunded agency. "Good morning," Mrs. Albright said, her voice warm yet authoritative.
"I'm Helen Albright."
"I have an appointment with Mrs. Eleanor Vance." Yes, come in," Chloe said, recovering quickly, though a flicker of surprise crossed her face. She ushered Mrs. Albright into the living room. Mark stood up awkwardly, offering a polite nod. I gestured to the armchair opposite me. "Mrs. Albright, thank you for coming. This is my son, Mark, and his wife, Chloe." Pleasantries were exchanged. Chloe, ever the gracious hostess when it suited her, offered coffee, which Mrs. Albright politely declined. "Perhaps just some water?" "Thank you." As Chloe went to the kitchen, Mrs. Albright turned to me. "Mrs. Vance, it was good to speak with you on the phone. I have the information you sent over regarding your diagnosis and your preferences for in-home care." Chloe returned with the water, her ears practically twitching. "In-home care?" she repeated, setting the glass down a little too firmly. "Yes," I said calmly. "Mrs. Albright is here to discuss a comprehensive care plan." Chloe shot a quick, anxious look at Mark. This was clearly not what she had expected. She had likely anticipated a discussion about how to transition me into a facility, or at best, secure some volunteer-based help. "Well," Chloe began, adopting a tone of gentle authority, "while in-home care is a lovely idea, Eleanor, we do have to be realistic about the costs. Your current insurance is, well, it's quite basic, as you know. And your savings." She let the sentence hang, a delicate implication of my financial limitations. "We've been looking at some very nice, affordable places like Golden Years Rest Stop that offer excellent value and round-the-clock supervision." Mrs. Albright listened patiently, her expression unreadable. I let Chloe finish. Then I met her gaze directly. "Chloe," I said, my voice even, "I appreciate your concern for my finances. However, my situation may not be quite what you imagine." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a beat. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Chloe's polite smile was fixed, but her eyes were wary. "You see," I continued, "some years ago I took out a rather substantial private insurance policy. A critical illness and long-term care plan. It's designed specifically for situations like this." I watched as the color slowly drained from Chloe's face. Mark just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The air in the room crackled with unspoken emotions. This was only the beginning. but the first tremor of their carefully constructed reality had just been sent. The look of dawning comprehension, mixed with disbelief, on Chloe's face was a picture I would not soon forget. The carefully laid plans she had been making, the assumptions about my helplessness and limited resources, were beginning to crumble right before her eyes. The silence that followed my statement about the private insurance policy was thick enough to cut with a knife. Chloe's perfectly composed expression had frozen, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Mark looked as though he'd been struck. He kept opening and closing his mouth, but no words came out. Mrs. Albright, the consummate professional, simply waited, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil clearly brewing in my son and daughter-in-law. To private policy? Chloe finally stammered, her voice a mere whisper of its usual confident tone. A substantial one? I nodded, allowing myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Yes, Chloe. Quite substantial. It provides for a significant lump sum payment upon the diagnosis of a critical illness, which, as you know, my condition qualifies for. That part of the claim has already been processed, and the funds received. I let that sink in. I saw Chloe's eyes dart to my handbag, as if imagining it stuffed with cash. Her mind, I suspected, was rapidly recalculating. And I continued, my voice gaining strength. It also provides a very generous monthly allowance for long-term care. This can be used for top-tier in-home nursing, specialized therapies, or a residency in a high-quality assisted living facility. Should I choose that route, Mrs. Albright chose that moment to interject smoothly, opening her briefcase. Indeed. Mrs. Vance shared the details of her Provident Life policy with me. It's one of the best I've seen. It allows for a highly customized and comprehensive care package. We can arrange for skilled nursing visits, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, personal care attendants, even meal preparation and companionship, all within the policy's coverage. She pulled out a sleek brochure for Elite Home Care Solutions, its glossy pages depicting smiling caregivers in cheerful, well-appointed homes. It was a world away from the grim image of Golden Years Rest Stop that Chloe had been so keen to promote. Mark finally found his voice. Mum, you never told us. There was a note of bewilderment, perhaps even a hint of reproach in his tone. No, Mark, I didn't. I replied gently. It was a provision I made for myself many years ago. I hoped I'd never need it. It wasn't something I felt the need to discuss. It was my safety net, for my peace of mind. My gaze flickered to Chloe, whose face was now a fascinating kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, chagrin, and perhaps, if I wasn't mistaken, a touch of raw envy. The narrative she had constructed, of me, the burdensome, financially draining mother-in-law, had just been spectacularly demolished. So, Chloe said, her voice tight, you can afford proper care? The emphasis she placed on proper was telling. Yes, Chloe, I confirmed. I can afford the best care. Mrs. Albright and I are going to design a plan that ensures I have everything I need, right here or wherever I choose to be. Mrs. Albright then began to outline some preliminary suggestions based on my medical reports. She spoke of daily visits from a registered nurse to manage my medication and monitor my symptoms, twice-weekly physiotherapy sessions to maintain my mobility, and a personal care assistant for several hours a day to help with daily tasks and ensure I wasn't overexerting myself. She mentioned the possibility of adapting my own little house for my needs, or if I preferred, exploring options like the Willows. Each word she spoke was like another nail in the coffin of Chloe and Mark's ill-conceived plans for me. Chloe sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The realization that she had no control over my future, that her opinions on affordable options were now utterly irrelevant, seemed to be dawning on her with painful clarity. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. I was no longer the dependent patient, subject to their decisions. I was a woman with resources, with choices, with agency. The relief I felt was immense, but it was coupled with a profound sadness for what their actions had revealed about their characters. My secret policy hadn't just bought me medical care, it had bought me freedom from their judgment and their pity. As Mrs. Albright continued to speak, Detailing the services and the quality of caregivers her agency provided, I watched Chloe. Her eyes were narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something else, a hard, resentful calculation. Mark, on the other hand, looked increasingly ashamed. He kept glancing at me, then quickly looking away, his face flushed. The full import of how they had treated me, juxtaposed with the reality of my preparedness, was clearly hitting him. This was the vindication I had sought, not loud or vengeful, but quiet, irrefutable, and utterly transformative. The immediate aftermath of the reveal was almost as telling as the reveal itself. Once Mrs. Albright had concluded her initial presentation, outlining a potential care schedule and promising to send over a detailed proposal, there was a strained silence. Chloe, who was usually so quick with a comment or an opinion, seemed temporarily stunned into speechlessness. Her carefully constructed world, where she held a certain amount of influence over my life and, by extension, Mark's decisions regarding me, had been upended. Her shock was palpable, but beneath it, I could already see the wheels of her mind turning, trying to process this new reality and, no doubt, its implications for her. Mark was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I had no idea. I'm so glad. I mean, this is wonderful news. That you'll be properly looked after." There was relief in his voice, genuine relief, but it was heavily laced with shame. He couldn't quite meet my eye. "Thank you, Mark," I said quietly. "It is a relief for me too." Chloe finally found her voice, though it was several notes higher than usual and brittle.
Well,
That's quite something, Eleanor. All this time and you never said a word." "We were so worried about the expense, about how to manage." She attempted a smile, but it was a poor imitation, more of a grimace. "Imagine us, stressing about golden years, when you had this treasure chest hidden away." The words treasure chest hung in the air, dripping with a sarcasm she couldn't quite conceal. The implication was clear. She felt deceived, perhaps even cheated out of the role of martyr she had been cultivating. "It wasn't a treasure chest, Chloe," I corrected gently. "It was a provision. A sensible precaution I took for my own future dignity and well-being. It was never intended to be a secret to cause distress, merely a private matter." Mrs. Albright, sensing the family dynamics at play, rose gracefully. "I'll leave you all to discuss this further. Mrs. Vance, I'll be in touch tomorrow with the detailed plan and costings, all of which, as we discussed, fall well within your policy's coverage." It was a pleasure meeting you all. Mark and I thanked her, and Chloe managed a tight, polite nod as she showed Mrs. Albright to the door. The moment the door closed, Chloe whirled around, her composure finally cracking. "A private matter?" she exclaimed, her voice sharp. "Eleanor, we've been turning ourselves inside out with worry. Mark has been losing sleep. We've been making difficult choices, thinking we were acting in your best interest, based on what we thought was your situation. And all along, you had this secret fortune?" "It's not a fortune, Chloe," I stated calmly. "It's an insurance policy, one I paid for with my own money over many years. Money I saved by going without, often. And the only difficult choices I witnessed were discussions about the most affordable way to place me in a facility I would have despised." Mark flinched. "Chloe, please," he interjected, his voice pleading. "Mum's right. We didn't handle this well. We assumed too much." "Assumed?" Chloe rounded on him. "We assumed she needed our help. We assumed she was vulnerable. Was that so wrong?" "What was wrong, Chloe?" I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of emotion I felt, was the assumption that my vulnerability equated to me being a burden. What was wrong was discussing my future as if I were a piece of inconvenient luggage to be disposed of as cheaply as possible. What was wrong was the lack of respect. The words hung in the air. Chloe stared at me, her face flushed with anger and, I suspected, deep embarrassment. She had been caught out, her motivations laid bare. She opened her mouth to retort, then seemed to think better of it, snapping it shut. Instead, she grabbed her handbag. "I need some air," she announced curtly and practically fled the room, the front door slamming behind her. Mark sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "Oh, Mum," he whispered.
I'm so sorry.
"I've been such a fool. A coward." I sat down beside him, a wave of exhaustion washing over me, but also a profound sense of release. The truth was out. The power had shifted. "It hasn't been easy, Mark," I said softly. "For any of us. But especially not when you feel your worth is being measured in dollars and cents by your own family." He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. I let her influence me. I was stressed about your health, about work, about everything, and I didn't stand up for you. I can never forgive myself for that." The immediate aftermath was raw, uncomfortable, but necessary. The foundations of their assumptions had been shattered, and now, perhaps, something more honest, though undoubtedly more complicated, could be built. Or perhaps not. But either way, I was now in control of my own destiny. My secret policy had not only ensured my physical care, but had also initiated a painful but crucial emotional reckoning. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for my health, but for my spirit. In the days that followed the explosive revelation of my insurance policy, a new, tentative dynamic began to establish itself. Chloe remained distant, her interactions with me clipped and formal, though laced with a new, grudging respect that was almost amusing to witness. The condescending pity was gone, replaced by a wary awareness that I was not the dependent, helpless individual she had perceived me to be. She busied herself with her own activities, largely avoiding any direct conversation about my future plans, which I took as a sign of her tacit acknowledgement that those plans were now firmly in my own hands. Mark, on the other hand, embarked on a campaign of quiet atonement. He was more attentive than he had been in months, not in an overbearing way, but with a gentle solicitude that felt more genuine. He'd make me tea, sit and talk with me, nod at me, and ask thoughtful questions about how I was feeling and what my preferences were. He apologized repeatedly, his shame still palpable. "I should have listened to you, Mum," he said one afternoon. "I should have trusted your strength. Chloe, she gets a bit carried away sometimes, and I just let things slide." There's no excuse. I listened, and I appreciated his remorse, but a part of me remained guarded. The hurt was too deep to be erased by a few heartfelt apologies. Our relationship had undeniably changed. There was a new honesty, perhaps, but also a loss of the innocent trust one once had in his unwavering support. Mrs. Albright from Elite Home Care Solutions was true to her word. A comprehensive care plan arrived the next day, detailing everything from skilled nursing visits to physiotherapy and personal assistance. The cost, while significant, was comfortably covered by my policy. I signed the agreement, a sense of profound empowerment washing over me. The first caregiver, a warm and capable woman named Sarah, started the following week. Her presence immediately lightened the atmosphere in the house, at least for me. Sarah was professional, kind, and incredibly competent. She managed my medications, helped me with exercises prescribed by the physiotherapist she arranged, and, just as importantly, provided cheerful companionship. Chloe observed Sarah's arrival with a tight-lipped curiosity, but made no comment. The fact that I could afford such personalized, high-quality care without any contribution from them seemed to be a constant, silent rebuke to her earlier pronouncements. My health, under this new regimen of dedicated care and reduced stress, began to show small but significant improvements. The flare-ups became less frequent, and my energy levels, while still low, were noticeably better. The relief of not having to worry about being a financial or emotional burden was a powerful medicine in itself. I also followed through on visiting the Willows, the upscale assisted living facility Martha's niece Monica managed. Martha drove me there one sunny afternoon. It was even more impressive in person than in the brochures. Beautifully landscaped gardens, elegant common areas, and spacious, light-filled apartments. Monica showed me the available one-bedroom unit with a garden view. It had a small kitchenette, a lovely sitting area, and a private patio. Residents I saw were active, engaged in various activities, from art classes to bridge games. It felt like a vibrant community, A far cry from the depressing institutional feel of golden years rest up. The thought of living there, with support available when I needed it but with my independence largely intact, was incredibly appealing. I didn't make an immediate decision, but knowing this option was available, fully funded by my policy, gave me an immense sense of security and freedom. Chloe and Mark, meanwhile, were left to navigate the fallout of their own actions. I overheard snippets of tense conversations between them, Chloe's voice often sharp with frustration, Mark's more subdued and weary. Their financial calculations had been thrown into disarray. Any unspoken expectations they might have harbored about inheriting my small house or savings relatively soon were now indefinitely postponed, perhaps permanently altered. More than that, I believe Chloe was grappling with a loss of control and a blow to her self-perception. She liked to be the one managing situations, the one making decisions. My quiet revelation had stripped her of that role in a very definitive way. She was also likely aware that her behavior had been exposed, not just to me, but to Mark in a new light. The burden she had complained about was now demonstrably self-sufficient, even prosperous in her ability to care for herself. This left Chloe looking not like a concerned caregiver, but like someone greedy and unkind. The subtle shift in their social circle, if Martha's discreet comments were anything to go by, suggested that word of my surprising independence was beginning to circulate, painting Chloe in a less than flattering light. Justice, I found, often arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable turning of tables. My vindication wasn't about gloating, it was about reclaiming my dignity and peace of mind. The process was ongoing, but with each passing day, as I grew stronger and more confident in my new arrangements, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The storm had passed, and I was charting my own course towards a more secure and respected future. The weeks turned into months, and life settled into a new rhythm, one dictated by my needs and choices, not by the reluctant convenience of others. Sarah, my primary caregiver from Elite Home Care, became a trusted companion as much as a medical professional. Her cheerful presence and competent care were a daily balm. We established a routine that included gentle exercises, nutritious meals she often helped prepare, and quiet afternoons where I could read or listen to music, free from the oppressive weight of feeling like an imposition. My health, while still managing a chronic condition, stabilized significantly. The consistent, high-quality care, combined with the absence of emotional stress, worked wonders. Dr. Peterson, during one of my checkups, remarked on my improvement with a pleased smile. "Whatever you're doing, Eleanor, keep doing it. You look better than you have in a long time." I simply smiled back, knowing the whatever included a healthy dose of independence and self-respect. I eventually made the decision to move to the Willows. While Sarah's in-home care was excellent, the thought of having my own space again, combined with the community and amenities the Willows offered, was too appealing to resist. It felt like a proactive step towards a new chapter, rather than a retreat. My little house, the one filled with so many memories, was put on the market. The proceeds, after settling some minor debts, would simply add to my financial security, though my insurance policy was more than sufficient for my ongoing needs at the Willows. Mark helped with the logistics of the move, his demeanor consistently remorseful and eager to please. He and I had several long, difficult conversations during this period. He expressed his shame and regret more fully, acknowledging the depth of his failure to support me when I was at my most vulnerable. "I was weak, Mum," he admitted, his eyes downcast. "I let Chloe's anxieties and her way of looking at things overshadow everything else.
I see that now.
I see how much I hurt you." I listened, and I believe his remorse was genuine. Forgiveness is a complex thing. I couldn't simply erase the pain, nor could I fully restore the blind faith I once had in him. But I could choose to move forward, to rebuild something new from the wreckage. Our relationship would never be the same, but it could, perhaps, become something more honest, more mature, built on a clearer understanding of each other's strengths and failings. "I understand you were under pressure, Mark," I told him. "But understanding isn't the same as excusing. What matters now is what you do going forward," he nodded, accepting my words without defensiveness. Chloe's reaction to my impending move was a mixture of relief and, I suspect, a lingering resentment. She was impeccably polite during any necessary interactions, even offering to help sort through some of my belongings, an offer I politely declined. But there was an undeniable coolness, a distance that spoke volumes. The Willows was, by any measure, a significant step up from Golden Year's Rest Stop, and she knew it. My ability to afford such a place, independently, was a constant, silent reminder of her misjudgment. I think, in her own way, she was dealing with the consequences of her actions. Her relationship with Mark had become strained. I noticed the lack of easy affection between them, the subtle undercurrent of tension. Perhaps my situation had forced Mark to reevaluate not just his treatment of me, but other aspects of his life with Chloe. The day I moved into my sunny little apartment at the Willows was a day of quiet triumph. Sarah helped me settle in, arranging my familiar books on the shelves, placing my cherished photographs just so. As I sat on my new, comfortable armchair, looking out at the beautifully tended garden, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I was home. Not the home of my past, but a new home, one I had chosen, one I had earned, one where I was respected and valued. I began to participate in some of the activities at the Willows. I joined a book club, started attending gentle yoga classes, and even discovered a latent talent for watercolor painting in the art studio. I made new friends, women and men with their own fascinating life stories, people who saw me as Eleanor, the engaging new resident, not Eleanor, the burden. I still reflected on the ordeal, on the pain of betrayal by those I loved most. There was a lingering melancholy for the bonds that had been irrevocably broken or altered. But overshadowing that was a deep sense of gratitude for my own foresight, for the strength I had found within myself, and for the vindication that had come not through anger or revenge, but through the quiet assertion of my own worth and independence. My secret insurance policy had been more than a financial instrument. It had been the key to reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace. It had taught my son a hard lesson, and it had shown his wife that underestimating a quiet, elderly woman could be a profound mistake. My new beginning was peaceful, empowered, and entirely my own. And that, I realized, was the best vindication of all.